Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Asio Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Chasing Giants podcast brought to us by Asio Gear. I got Don Higgins, I'm Terry Peer. Welcome back for another week's episode. It has been an absolute crazy week, and Don, we're going to kick it right off with, I think, one of the big topics that is on everybody's minds right now is habitat projects. And you've been on the consulting visits. I've done a couple here within the last week, but I want you to pick apart as we start the show and dive right into it, this term called TSI. And I was on a couple properties this week, and when the NRCS is involved, it seems like we got people that maybe come from an NWTF background or people that come from the logging industry, and everybody's kind of got a different version of what TSI means. But I want you to focus on maybe this first segment of walking us through what TSI means for mature bucks.
Yeah, TSI, or timber stand improvement. It's basically, cutting and killing some of the less desirable trees in a timber to open up the canopy, create some ground cover. Also, it'll free up space for the trees you leave behind, encourage them to grow faster than they would with the crowding. But there's a lot of different, I guess, ideas on how to go about it. You know, have a timber guy and he's got his ideas, and you got the turkey people that have theirs, and then us deer folks have ours. And as far as I'm concerned, from a deer perspective, in my consulting plans, a lot of times I will call for a very aggressive TSI. And basically that's cutting or girdling, cutting a ring around the tree to kill it standing. Any tree that's never going to have timber value or value for wildlife. And that shouldn't be, it shouldn't cause any issues with the timber folks, because basically I want to leave every timber tree. I think we can be good stewards of that resource without destroying the timber. But, you know, why would you let a junk tree stand and compete with a good one next to it, or shade the ground and, you know, block out sunlight from creating understory? So the TSI cut is just a great tool. But I think most of what I've seen is people don't cut it hard enough. They don't get aggressive enough. There's some species that are really going to never have much value. Beech, for example, a lot of the maples, hackberry, locust, box elder, elms. Kill them. Get them out of the way. Let the oaks and the walnuts and things like that flourish. And as that's happening, you can create understory under those nice oaks and walnuts or whatever, and have some great deer habitat. So just a lot of different opinions on how to go about it. But I think the more aggressive, the better, because the more aggressive you get, the more sunlight's going to get in there, the more understory you're going to have, which means the more browse and the better bedding cover you're going to have.
I know a couple situations that I've dealt with here recently. There's been an intermediate forester involved between the landowner and the logging company. And it seems like they don't want to take a lot of those trees that you just mentioned on the list. They want to come in and take, you know, the highly desirable bigger trees. So let's say 14 inches and above oaks or walnuts, and they want to leave anything under that for, you know, a future cut. Is it typical for the projects you've been around to go in and finish a TSI after a logger gets done? In other words, the logger doesn't take enough, so you then have to go in and identify the trees, know the species, and you're still leaving those immature, you know, younger oaks and walnuts and maybe cherry, you know, different things that have a future value. But is it typical to go in and have to do a TSI after the logger?
Well, you don't have to, but a lot of times in my plans, if there's mature timber that could be harvested, I want that timber harvested first and then come in after the logger and do the TSI cut, leaving the smaller but the nicer oaks and walnuts and whatever is left. So I think you do both. I think you do a timber harvest and a TSI together, and it's just even more beneficial because you're getting more sunlight in.
Yeah, that's the key to that. I think and I don't want to sound like we don't want to make habitat for turkey or we're against the turkey fundamentals, but when I look at a section of woods and I can see across that woods 150 200 yards, yeah, that's great for turkey. I get that, but it is not what we want for mature bucks. Talk a little bit about what mature bucks are wanting out of this timber and why.
Well, when it comes to the turkey, I talk about a situation I ran into in Missouri one time where I was on a side by side with the client driving right down a path on a ridge top. One side of the path was just great deer cover. There's all kinds of understory, regeneration, weeds, briars, saplings, and such. The other side of the trail was just totally open. There was no understory whatsoever. And I thought, my first thought was, well, there must be more sunlight getting in on the side over there where all the thick cover's at. And I look up and the canopy was the same on both sides of that trail. And I said to the client, I said, I can't figure out what's going on here. I said, this side of the trail is super thick and great cover. The other side's wide open. And I look up and the canopy's the same on both sides. And he said, well, I've got a biologist from the Missouri Department of Conservation who really likes turkeys, and he comes in and he burns my woods every spring. And this path that we are on is the fire break, and he comes down this fire break with a leaf blower and he blows all the leaves off of it, and then he burns the one side, so he keeps the understory from ever coming on with the fire. Well, that leaves absolutely nothing for the deer. Yeah, there's going to be some acorns fall off those bigger trees and such, but there's no browse there whatsoever. There's no cover for them to bed in. And, the other side of that trail was just so much more conducive for whitetails with the browse and the bedding cover.
So when we're setting up a property, we always identify the sanctuary. And a lot of times that's either going to be a big timber harvest where we're trying to make it extremely thick to hold more deer, or in the case out by where you live where there's not a lot of big timber, we put in switchgrass as a sanctuary. But that's the key into most of the properties that we go to, is getting the sanctuary as thick to hold as many deer as possible.
Absolutely. That's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle that we put together. And, to kind of shift gears a little bit, we get accused sometimes of being too conservative with our plans. And I heard that a couple times this week, totally different situations. But, my comeback to that is our goal is always when we go to a property, we want it's a two-pronged approach. We want to help that client grow the biggest bucks he can possibly grow on that property. And then we want to help him kill them. It does no good to grow them if you can't kill them. So you can grow them and then you can get too aggressive and you can bump that deer off the farm and boom, he's gone. You've ruined your chances for the year. However, if you're conservative about your approach, and the smaller the property, the more important this is, you can keep that buck bedded on your farm and eventually get him killed. Yeah, you may have to hunt a few times to get it done, but you do get it done. And our clients are proving it works, with all the success stories that we've got. I mean, every year it's just dozens and dozens and dozens of guys shooting the biggest bucks of their life. And they're doing it with our conservative approach. And then people can say what they want about us being too conservative, but I would much rather be too conservative than too aggressive. And I learned that lesson the hard way long before I even owned property myself, way back in the day before the days of trail cameras and food plots and leased ground and all that. And it was a whole lot easier to get permission. I would burn out properties every year, multiple properties. And, I'd first get permission and it was easy to get permission back then. you get on a new property and boy, the deer were everywhere and the first few hunts were great, but it was all downhill after the first few hunts because I was just way too aggressive on those properties, and I was the only one hunting them in most cases. And just me by myself, simply bow hunting, I was ruining these properties. And finally I learned, hey, the problem is you, dummy. It's not anything else. The deer are figuring you out real quick. And I became very conservative in my approach on those permission properties. And then when I later acquired property of my own, my whole management approach was very, very conservative. I did not want those deer to know they were being hunted whatsoever and only hunt the edges. And it absolutely works. I will put the system up against any system out there. It's not a system designed because we're lazy or anything like that. It's because the whole goal is we got to keep those deer on the farm. And if we keep them on the farm, we can get them killed. But we get aggressive and we bump them off and it's over. And TSI, take this full circle. You do a TSI in your timber and you create some good thick bedding cover, and then you stay out of it, keep the human intrusion down, and you hunt the edges and let the deer stay there day after day after day. Eventually you're going to kill him on that edge, but in the course of a season, you're going to get him shot. Our clients prove that. We prove it. Being conservative, there is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It is by far the best approach to land management. And again, the smaller the property, the more critical that becomes. On a bigger property, like I was on one this week that was, I don't know, pushing 500 acres. And it was great cover all over that 500 acres and fairly flat where food plots could be put in a number of different locations. You can get a little more aggressive in a situation like that. You don't have to hunt the exact edge, but when you're on a small property and cover is limited, you need to be conservative.
I think that I understand what the person or you're saying with conservative, but I think that people are looking for the easy button for a complicated fix. They think it's harder than it really is. And it goes back to the old term that you've used for years called discipline. And they want to be able to hunt like they always used to or do what they always used to instead of just pull back and take a very simple approach. And I've seen you on properties when you've had me with you, you look at what the property gives you for access and then build the habitat from there versus going in and hunting every rub or scrape that's already on the property. And I think people that go to different events, seminars, watch YouTube, they're looking for this complicated plan that really isn't necessary. It really boils down to lack of intrusion by using the right access and discipline to stay out. And that's what the big buck's there for.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes that deer hunters who own their property make is they want to hunt that property the very same way that they would hunt a permission property or even a public piece. They go in after they buy the property and they see, well, the deer are doing this, the deer are doing that, so I'm going to put my stand here and I'm going to hunt him because this is where they're coming through. Well, when you own property, you've got a huge advantage, and that advantage is that you can manipulate that deer movement and you can push those deer past locations, specific trees where it's to your advantage, where you got good access, where you can play the wind. And I don't think most landowners understand that, how much they can manipulate deer. If a deer's exiting a woods into a food plot, for example, or a field in one location, go over there and drop a tree across that trail and make a new one with a saw. Basically, all you need is a pruning saw. Give him an easy access point. You can put them deer right under the tree that's ideal for you to hunt from. And I think that that's a big thing that a lot of landowners miss, is they just want to hunt their property as the same way they would a permission property.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and listen to a spot from Asio. Make sure you're checking out their new turkey vest and all the other new gear that they have on their website. We'll be right back to talk a little bit more about what we were just wrapping up with and talk about some speaking schedules before the Higgins Hot Seat segment. We'll be right back.
Asio Gear has perfected one of the most innovative camo patterns on the market. The unique camo pattern designed to mimic the feather patterns of one of North America's greatest predators, the great horned owl. Combined with intuitive features, superior comfort, and ultra high quality fabrics give bow hunters the ultimate advantage. Asio has outfitted over 10,000 bow hunters across the country with over 1,000 5-star reviews. Visit asiogear.com to check it out for yourself. Use code CHASINGGIANTS for 15% off.
Okay, Don, before the next segment starts, let's talk a little bit about some speaking engagements that you got going on, and then I want to kind of talk about this a little bit more. This is interesting, but let's talk a little bit about where you're going to be speaking at here in the near future.
Yeah, so this Thursday, March 19th, I'm going to be in Shelbina, Missouri at the Shelbina Christian Church. Going to have a meal there, and then I'm going to give a talk. If you want more information, the phone number is 573. March 28th, I'm going to be at the Wisconsin Deer Expo in Wisconsin Dells. I'm just going to be there for one day. I'm going to be in the booth for Extreme Custom Food Plots, the real world distributor up in Wisconsin. Scott Finnedahl, going to be in his booth on Saturday, March 28th at that event. And then a new one. Haven't talked about this yet, just planned it this week. So on April 11th, I think a lot of you guys have heard me talk about a couple of Ohio properties I got that we are selling. Well, I've got to make a trip to Ohio to do the finishing touches on a property. So I'm going to be over there on April 11th, and there's been a lot of interest in this property. And what we're going to do is I'm actually going the day before to mark out some of those final touches to this property, but I'm going to stay, and on Saturday, April 11th, anyone that's interested in potentially purchasing that property, we're going to be there to give tours. That property is in Jackson County. It's 383 acres. It's located about 8 miles west of Oak Hill, Ohio. To attend, we're not going to just open this up to the public, or we're going to have 200 people show up to do a property tour. So we're going to vet people. You have to have a pre-approved bank letter as a pre-approved buyer. And that letter must state that you're pre-approved for a minimum of $2 million to purchase a property. And if you're interested, we'll give you the grand tour. This property is ready to go. Austin Razer's done a lot of work on that farm as well. He's planted food plots. We've got 360 blinds in place on the farm already. I've had the coonless feeders out feeding the deer on that farm. It's not been hunted in 2 years. I've been to it a couple times just to get these projects rolling and such. But if you're interested in that, reach out to me personally. That's April 11th.
All right. Well, speaking of Austin Razer, he's setting off to my right now with his feet kicked back because we had a really hard day at work. You can see the background. I'm in Southern Illinois. The new property that I talked about a couple weeks ago that I have, we're down here working on it, 300 acres. I haven't been as this excited about a new project, but Austin's kind of helping me with this thing. We're going to be hunting it for the first time this fall. It was his first time on the property, only my second, but we had meetings with the landowner the first day, and he basically didn't turn us down on any of the ideas that we had. So we made a phone call to somebody that he knows and had an excavator delivered today. And you've seen Austin on an excavator before. We went through, and just like what you were talking about, manipulating that habitat, this property is a bunch of ag with ravines and ditches and creeks going through it. And with that excavator, him on it, and me going ahead with him, dropping old hackberry and locust trees, we built some trump walls to funnel these deer. But the most important thing, and I might do a video on Chasing Giants TV about it, but instead of going in and hunting basically where a trail is or where there might be a potential funnel, we basically built our own funnels after I picked the tree that had the right access and the right wind. And you can't do that on all lease properties, so I'm pretty lucky that the landowner's all for what we're doing here. But man, we put a full day's work in with him on that excavator and me out in front of him with a saw.
Well, I finally got a day off the consulting trail today myself, and I put 2 tree stands up on 2 different permission properties. hung some rope scrapes, get them weathered before summer rolls around. I get the cameras out, pulled a bunch of cameras. I think I've got one camera left to pull. And it's been a busy week, but I seen probably two of the most unique properties this week that I've seen in a long time. And we always, at the end of our consulting season, you and I always pick our top properties. I seen one this week that's going to be, I don't know if it'll be number one, but it's going to be on the list, no doubt about it. It is a fantastic property. I won't give the state away, but I'll say it's not Illinois. How's that? And this one will be on the list here in a couple of weeks or so when we get done with our consulting season. The other one was in Indiana. It was about 500 acres, and it was old strip mine ground that's been reclaimed, and it's growing up in just all kinds of thick, nasty brush and volunteer trees and such. I'm not sure if the owner wants me to mention his name or not, so I won't. But I'm calling it Indiana 200. So goal is to kill some 200s on this property, and I think there's a very, very good chance that it's going to happen there.
I was just texting with him a little bit ago before we started recording. He was very encouraged with your visit and had a great time with you. So I wish I could have made it, but we only had a window to come here and work in Illinois. I did a property, you know how sometimes we get asked, is a property too small to do a visit on? And that's one of the common questions we get. But one of our real world dealers actually asked me that question at our recent dealer event. And so I stopped by and said I would help him out with it. And they just bought this little 35 acre little homestead, beautiful house on it. They're raising some sheep. They got a bunch of kids. And man, here's the thing that I enjoy about our job is that, if it was you or I's property, the plan would be completely different. But when we sit down and listen to a landowner, and I know that he's got 4 young boys that like going and playing, and he's got an older son that likes raising sheep and livestock, and you only got 30 acres to put all that into, the creativity's got to come, and you got to just really talk to the landowner and say, and look, we can make this to where you have some stands to hunt, but you have to sacrifice. And to see that people still want to take care of what's important with their family, it's really special to see good people like that. And I saw some of those people this week, and he wants to have a couple stands to hunt. He knows that the ceiling is probably pretty low, but it was really important to him to have where kids can go out, and I'd rather him do that than be in playing video games. He can always find a permission property, go to do something else. But I think it's really fun. And the other thing that I saw is, I don't know if people have realized, but with our new relationship with Hawk Optics, a bunch of our dealers are starting to carry Hawk now. So that was one of the things that they wanted to really go after, was getting their product locally. So if you guys haven't paid attention to our dealer portal on Real World's website, make sure you're going out and talking to them, because most of them are having the opportunity to carry Novix or Hawk or Gingrich trees. We're trying to make those connections to get cheaper, not to pay all the expensive freight or shipping of all these products, and get them closer to you. It's really important for us to connect those dots to people.
Yeah, 360 blinds as well. I know there's a lot of, we was at the 360 event this winter. A lot of those dealers they had were also real world dealers. So we knew a lot of people in that room.
Well, good segue there, because we got to do the Higgins hot seat sponsored by 360 blinds next. So way to go there, buddy. Was that scripted, or did that just roll out?
Yeah, just fate.
It was all fate, just like a comment after Hillary's State of the Union that one year, right?
When people start comparing me to Hillary, I don't take that very well.
All right. Well, here's the question for you, and it's going to go back to log. Go ahead.
I got another comment. I got a shout out to all the Amish drivers, because I was in Ohio here last week, and I had 3 different Amish drivers come up to me and introduce themselves, and they all knew exactly who I was, because when they get in, they're driving these folks around, they got to listen to Chasing Giants podcast. And so these people, they knew my voice, and first time they ever met me, but they all knew exactly who I was. 3 of them, one of them was a lady even, and she knew exactly who I was. She plants food plots, she said. So I got to thinking, if I met 3 of them in one little trip, how many Amish drivers are out there that listen to Chasing Giants? So tip of the hat to those folks.
Yeah, they a lot of times have to use their phone to let the Amish people that's commuting to work or wherever, and so they get forced to listen, almost like our wives, as we're talking on the phone every time we're in the vehicle about hunting stuff. So,
yep.
All right, back to the Higgins hot seat. This question goes back to more logging and TSI. I want to ask you a hypothetical question and get your opinion on it. So if a property, let's say a larger tract of ground, say it would be like your Jackson property or maybe a 300 to 500 acre property, and let's say 100 acres needed to be cut. So it's all mature timber. You walk into the timber, can see 100 yards across it, no understory. And you finally got a forester or a logger to agree that 60 to 80% of the trees need to be cut. We got on the same page as far as what trees needed to be taken out to grow that canopy back. Would you do it all in 1 year, or would you do it in phases? If it was a big tract of ground with a big group of timber, would you do it in sections, say 50 acres a year, and maybe do it in sections and phase it in?
Well, your timing is absolutely perfect, because on my Ohio trip, I stopped and did 3 properties in Indiana on the way. One of those was an 800 acre property. The guys are probably listening to the podcast right now. And of that 800 acres, I'm going to guess about 500 of it was probably timber and brush, and 300 tillable ag fields. And then that's just my guess. I could be off a little bit. But anyway, so on their plan, I divided their 500 acres or so of timber into 4 different sections. And my plan calls for them to log and then do an aggressive TSI on each of those sections, but to space them 5 years apart. So they'll do one, say year 1, and then 5 years later, year 6, they'll do the second one. So basically in 15 years, they've cut all 4 of them. And the reason for it is you don't want that entire farm to regenerate at the same stage. So you want to stage those different, or space out those different stages of regrowth, so that there's always something that's fresh and some that's older. So obviously we started, and I numbered them on the plan 1 through 4, and number 1 is the area that had the most mature timber and was the most open, and area number 4 was the one that was the thickest today. So we just moved across the farm in that way. But yeah, I think you should stagger it out if you've got a lot of acreage to work with.
But the end result that gives you is the canopy opening and the undergrowth coming up with all of the autumn olive, multiflora rose, all that. It's not that takes over the entire farm at the same time. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, exactly. Because that stuff can be great cover, and it can be controlled too. Spraying with a drone, you can control those invasives. And I made a social media post the other day. I was on a property, actually it's one that I owned and then I sold it, and Austin was there and did the TSI cut on it, and I still have permission to hunt it, so I'm still there. In fact, I was just on it today. But I posted a video clip showing how fantastic it looks, and it looks just absolutely great. And I got all these comments. Yeah, and all you did was open up for the invasives. The invasives are going to take over, blah, blah, blah. Well, that was when I posted that a couple of weeks ago when I was there. Well, I was back there today, and I started looking real close to see what is coming on. And the only invasive, if you want to call it invasive, is multiflora rose. There's some multiflora rose coming on, but mainly what's coming on is just grasses and weeds and blackberry briars. Lots of briars coming on, which is a great thing. I like the briars, and so does the deer. I didn't see anything really of invasives coming on, so I think people get the idea that they did it and invasives took over their place or someplace they know about, so it's going to happen everywhere. Well, that's not exactly the case.
Well, we have seen some clear cuts. We get down in that southeast Ohio where like the pulpwood business came in and just did a complete clear cut. Those invasives of what are they, box elder and what is that tree of heaven? I forget what they always call that, but you get all these small trees that end up growing up 2 inches from each other that you just can't even get through. So we have seen that, especially on clear cut ground, but with what Austin does, it's like you and I have talked. You almost can't cut it too hard to appease us, and I just don't think people understand that. They're just so leery of cutting a tree.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I understand why. There's no taking it back. Once you cut it, it's cut. It's done. You can't undo it. But I've just learned those junk trees, whatever species. And sometimes the invasives can take over. We did the presentation there at Chipshawana with the FAE. And, we went through that section on my farm that Austin had cut real hard. And yeah, the bush honeysuckle did come in there, really aggressive. But the thing of it is, you can go in there with something like the FAE mulcher and you can create trails. It goes right back to what I was talking about earlier, is people not manipulating their property enough to get the deer doing what they want. And that's exactly what we did on that project that we showed in our presentation. Is I went into that invasive timber and I put those deer right in front of 3 different tree stands by cutting a path, giving them the path of least resistance. And they followed it like crazy, all the pictures that we showed in our presentation. So, yeah, you might get some of that, but use it to your advantage.
Make it an opportunity.
Yep.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break for Midwest Land Group and come back with our listener-submitted questions. We'll be right back.
Ever had a terrible real estate experience? Average realtors usually spend more time selling themselves than on selling your land. They'll tell you anything to get the listing. They know that if they get the listing, you're stuck with them. Not here. Midwest Land Group has changed the way land is sold and is the only brokerage to offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That means if we don't meet your expectations, you can fire us. That puts all the pressure on us to perform. We don't just list land, we sell it. If you're looking to buy or sell property, don't before you talk to us. Visit us at MidwestLandGroup.com.
All right, the first question comes from Mark Zoke from Germansville, Pennsylvania. It says, Don and Terry, I'm just about finished with clearing trees and stumps from a half-acre area with intentions to plant clover and many fruit and chestnut trees along the edge. Before it's time to plant here in a month or so, is there something I can spread or spray that will help the clover? I was thinking maybe a pre-emergent or something along those lines. Well, Mark, there's no pre-emergent that I know of that you can put down before putting your clover down, so that's out. But I think it's very, very important that you do a soil test and you get your pH right to start with, because very often in situations like you described, the pH is way off, way low most of the time, and you're going to need a lot of lime. And if you don't do it, your clover is going to suffer for it and be day and night different. So you need to get a soil test immediately, and you're probably going to need a lot of lime. I'm going to guess you may need 3 tons per acre. That's the best thing you can do. Manure, if you've got access to manure, get that in there and work it in the soil, get some organic matter, and that decaying organic matter is good for the soil as well. But that lime and getting that pH right is really critical.
I'm guilty in certain years where I just ran out of time and just planted it, and man, I've seen the results suffer. It's a very small cost thing that you can do. It's the easiest insurance policy that you'll ever forget. I mean, you're talking, we waste a whole lot more money on far less, and I've been guilty of getting in a hurry and not doing it, and really been disappointed with the results. So think about it. It's definitely worth your time.
Yep.
I'm a little slower here. I don't have a mouse and only one screen.
The next one comes from Brian Murray from Charlotte, Michigan. He says, what type of food plot would you put on your property if the properties around you are corn and soybean fields. I only have 25 acres, 13 of which are leased out to the neighboring farmer. Well, I think this brings up a point that I have to make with clients and actually real world customers a lot too. They ask, what should I plant in my plot? And I say, well, soybeans are my favorite if you got, space to put soybeans where they're not going to get browsed. That'd be my number one choice. Then they'll fire back, well, all the farmers around me have corn and soybeans. I don't want to plant corn and soybeans. The deer got plenty of that. Yeah, but my question then is, don't the farmers harvest their corn and soybeans? How many standing soybean fields are around your area in December and January and February, and when the deer need it the most? And I'm in the same situation. I'm out here in ag country, guys. I got thousands of acres of soybeans around me and corn as well. And those are my two primary crops that I'm growing. So don't discount corn and soybeans just because the farmers are planting it. Soybeans are number one in my book. Number two, there's a lot of other things that are right there. Clover is great. Alfalfa is a good one. Corn, especially NutriCrave corn, is huge. So, but don't let the farmer dictate what you're going to put in your crop, because when the deer need it most, the farmer's field is going to be barren.
Before we move to the next question, talk a little bit about your experiment with your hairy vetch this year on your soybean fields. Let's talk about what you thought of it, and are you going to do it again?
I'm absolutely going to do it again. Yeah, I overseeded my soybeans with hairy vetch because I'm on a rotation where my soybean plots last year will be corn this year. And so I planted the hairy vetch in there, which is a legume, produces a lot of nitrogen. And, this spring I'm going to let that grow until it's time to plant, and it'll put some nitrogen in the soil. But, I'm going to make a video. I was going to do it today. It was just too windy here to make a good video, but I was listening to somebody else had produced a video basically bashing corn and soybeans and non-GMO, and it's just full of misinformation and just trying to talk people out of things that I tried to talk them into. And I think maybe that was the whole goal of the video, but I'm going to clear up some misconceptions there. And one of those is that if you got a weed issue, you need to plant enlist soybeans so that you can spray them, with different chemicals instead of Roundup or glyphosate, because too many weeds are getting resistant. And if you see my soybean plots, they are clean as can be, and I'm planting Gen 2s, and they weren't always that way. I had issues with water hemp and mare's tail, but what I discovered was if you use a pre-emergent herbicide, you prevent those weeds from ever happening, then it's not an issue. And I'm coming full circle with this because this person was saying on their video that, yeah, you use a pre-emergent herbicide and then you can't overseed. Well, I just proved you can, because I got a fantastic stand of hairy vetch in my soybeans last year. I mean, that stuff was a foot tall, late in the fall. The deer really ate it down to about nothing over the winter, but now it's starting to green back up. I was looking at it today. I mean, it's coming back, and I'm going to have a great stand of it. But
do you think that because hairy vetch is another legume, that it will be more flexible with the different residuals versus going in and planting a grass family product?
Well, that's a good question, but I also, with my hairy vetch, I mixed in some Balanza clover, because that's a good nitrogen producer as well. And I did not see much of that at all. So I think the residual herbicide did take care of that. Now I know brassicas, yeah, they are very susceptible to pre-emergent herbicides. So you can overseed, but you got to be careful what you're going to overseed with. And, with my corn, the pre-emergent I use is Resicor, and does a fantastic job. Again, going back to this video I saw, they were saying that, trying to grow non-GMO corn and not be able to spray it is just next to impossible. You're going to have nothing but a weed patch and blah, blah, blah. Well, I've proven many, many times that that's not the case. But I've had great luck going in and overseeding into that corn with rye. And so those corn plots are going to be beans next year. And that rye, with its allelopathic properties, basically it's almost like a natural herbicide. does not affect the soybean, but it really suppresses a lot of weed growth and gives the deer another green crop to eat right there with the corn. So just a lot of misinformation out there. People talking about things they've got zero experience with.
Well, you saw the drone footage during the FAE presentation that we did of my corn and my plots, and it was manicured better than any year I've ever had, and I didn't spray a thing on it except for Resicor the day before I planted it. So I'm sold on that product. It did phenomenal for me this year.
I think we got to get into the mindset of preventing weeds instead of killing weeds. And that's an issue with the food plotter is they think you got to spray something to kill the weeds. Well, we need to start thinking about spraying something to prevent the weeds from ever coming on. Then you don't have to kill them.
Almost sounds like our diet conversation last week, right? We eat healthier and prevent it from the beginning, right?
Yeah, kind of.
All right, let's go to the next question here.
This one comes from David Ammon from Highland, Illinois. It says, "Hi, Don and Terry. Thanks for all the great information you provide on the podcast. As a dealer, I want to ask a question I seem to get asked quite regularly regarding Gen 2 beans and figured others may have it as well, so I thought this would be a good place to ask. We have planted Gen 2 beans for the last couple of years and have a plot that we can't seem to kill the water hemp with post-emergent herbicide." Man, we was just talking about this. We should have read this question. "We are hesitant to spray the field with pre-emergent herbicide because we like to be able to overseed greens into the beans late summer into the fall. My question is, would it be best to spray with pre-emergent herbicide? And if so, would the greens still germinate and work if we had good rain in the fall? Or should we move to the Enlist soybean products to be able to spray Liberty to keep the water hemp killed? If so, are the Enlist beans the same as Gen 2s but with different chemical tolerances? Thank you." David, no, they're not the same bean. Totally different. I try my best, even though we sell Enlist soybeans, I try my best to talk food plotters out of planting Enlist soybeans. The deer do not like them as well. I've proven it to myself a couple of times on this farm. I will never plant Enlist soybeans again. The deer do not like them near as well as the Gen 2 soybeans. In fact, I had a situation where they refused to eat them on my farm. So I'm definitely not ever going to plant them again. And we just covered this in the last question that, yeah, I think Gen 2s are the way to go. I think you need to use a pre-emergent herbicide. And I think you just need to experiment a little bit because you can overseed with certain things. I think hairy vetch is a great one because it's a legume that the deer love. High nutrient values, and I think it'll really catch on, but as more people try it. I'm going to be experimenting with a lot of other seeds, overseeding into my soybeans this year to try to find a mix of things that can be overseeded that the pre-emergents just don't affect. And again, the brassicas are very susceptible. The turnips and radish and things like that. They just, a lot of times the period where you can't replant or plant those products, you're talking like up to a year, sometimes maybe even more, depending on the rate that you're using. So you're going to have to stay away from the brassicas, but hairy vetch is a great option.
Yeah, I think it's going to be in our arsenal for years to come by all means. So. All right, let's go to the next one here. I'll click over on it.
All right, this one comes from Chad Fox from Morocco, Indiana. It says, "Our farm in southern Indiana sits between two different rivers. We can't follow the typical food plots and habitat changes most properties make for our deer. Our farm floods every year, making things very difficult for us. We do feed with feeders most of the year. Any food plots or habitat suggestions?" Yeah, Chad, and you're probably not going to like my answer, but I picked your question because I think it brings up a very good talking point. My suggestion to you is you sell that farm. And we get questions. Well, we get questions all the time. What do you do about this? What do you do about that? And there's no answer. There's no solution to some problems.
Sell it to a duck farm.
sell it to somebody, go buy you a deer farm. And I don't know if you got personal ties to that property or whatever. We've been on consulting visits. I just was about a week ago, and I know the others in our group have as well, where we've had to tell the client, your best bet would be to sell this farm and buy a different one. And every time the second farm the client buys and has us back is always better than the first one, because we open their eyes to what a good hunting property looks like, what it needs. And, we get these questions that there's just not an answer for. What are we going to plant where it floods? I mean, what's going to survive in the flood? Are we going to plant rice? That's about all the only option. Sell the farm. And I'm not saying that to be smart or, when you make fun or anything, but sometimes you just got to fold them and go get another hand dealt to you. And it sounds like in your case, it's time to fold them and move on.
It's no different than farms without access or farms that you can't control the neighbors. I mean, it's no different. It's just it's a variable that you can't overcome. When you have a variable you can't overcome with a habitat plan, and you really want to take something to the next level, sometimes that means starting over.
And usually there's two choices. You're either going to have to lower your expectations or your goals, or if you want to keep your goals, you're going to have to move on. And
right.
It's really that simple.
And I feel, and that's one of the limiting factors for me personally is, my wife's fifth generation on our farm. It's never being sold. That was the deal that we have with it. So it is what it is. And I have to accept that farm has a ceiling that I'm hoping that my other properties far exceed. So I understand that some properties, there is a value to it that, selling it and swapping out is not an option. So we get it. All right. This is the last one here.
This one comes from Max Jolma from Ashland, Wisconsin. He says, hey, Don and Terry, I've been listening to your show for several years now, and I've heard you talk about how deer like bedding in your switchgrass. I've also seen plenty of deer and mature bucks coming out of your switchgrass in your videos, so clearly they do bed in there. Why is it that so many people further north claim deer will not bed in switchgrass, period? The whiteboard guy claims that switch is great for screening but not bedding. Another up-and-coming, supposedly habitat professional that has a platform is adamant that deer will not bed in switchgrass and that it's a complete waste of space. He's from Minnesota, as is the whiteboard guy. Do you think that deer use switchgrass differently in different parts of the Midwest? I'd like to know what you think, because I'm tired of hearing from these peons that are popping up left and right and acting like they know everything and putting out videos with some absolute absurd ideas that people actually believe when the guy saying it is still wet behind the ears. It's frustrating that some of these guys even have a platform. Thanks, and keep doing what you're doing. You guys are awesome.
This guy wanted to push a button, didn't he?
Max, can we send you 2 t-shirts for that? Well, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think what happens is we get, and I'm probably as guilty as anybody, is we get kind of narrow-minded thinking that what we have observed is how it is everywhere. And that's just not the case with anything, really. Going back to the conversation earlier, where I was talking about the invasives, and people were saying that opening up the canopy of the woods is just going to invite invasives, and in some cases it was. I described a case on my farm where it absolutely did do that, but then I also just described a situation on a property that I hadn't sold where we did it and there's no invasives there. It's filling in with native vegetation like blackberry briars. So I think we all get sometimes narrow-minded, seeing things. I mean, we've made observations and then we're relaying those observations, and I think sometimes we paint with a pretty broad brush and we just assume it's like that everywhere. Well, I've seen plenty of farms where the deer just are all over the switchgrass, and I'll be honest, I've seen places where they don't use it and I can't explain why, because it's great bedding cover, great stands of switchgrass. I think a lot of it has to do with pressure. I think that switchgrass can be a a great place for the deer to get away from pressure. I think it can be the size of the plot. I think the small plot doesn't have near the attraction as a bigger one. I think it can be tied to what else the deer have available. I've seen on my farm that certain bucks just seem to love the wooded cover, and other bucks seem to love the switchgrass. And you could just about count on in the afternoon, evening hunt, that if a buck showed up, a certain buck was going to pop out of the switchgrass, another one was going to come out of the woods. And so it's an individual preference of the deer to some degree as well, but they absolutely use the switchgrass on my farm. And as far as using switchgrass for screening, I'll tell you what, it doesn't even come close to comparing to miscanthus. And here's why. You can plant 3 rows of miscanthus, and that whole planting is only going to be about, even when it fills out, you're only looking at maybe 8 foot wide. You plant 8 foot of switchgrass and that stuff's going to fall over. It needs a bigger, wider strip just to kind of support itself and hold itself up. Miscanthus is a far, far superior screen than switchgrass. Now, when you get up in the north, that might not be the case. There's definitely a line up there somewhere, I'm not sure where it's at, where miscanthus just doesn't survive very well. So, again, I think we get kind of narrow-minded in our thinking. We paint with a broad brush, and we think that what we observed is how it's going to be everywhere, and that's not the case.
Well, I don't think the switchgrass in the north deer not liking to bed in it is a geographic thing, because we've seen some pictures of Dana Rogers is he in the Dakotas, I believe?
Yeah, South Dakota.
And I mean, he's written for all kinds of publications and shown pictures of his stands with the animals using it like nobody's business. So I don't think that it's geographic, but there might be something to it that we can't explain. I mean, it's just as simple as that.
I think it's either the property, or the size of the plot.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that was the last question of the day. We got a couple minutes left, and why don't we play a little game? Are you up for a little game? You feeling froggy even though you're tired after a long day?
Well, how can I say no?
All right. So this new off-the-cuff game is presented by Coonless Feeders. And Austin Razer, who's kicked in a recliner off to my right, he's got to come behind me and get on camera, and you get to ask him anything you want off the top of your head, and we'll see how many shades of red this guy's face turns when he looks over my shoulder here on camera in just a second.
Here comes Austin.
His wife is really going to enjoy this. You know that, right?
Well, his wife I've told them both for a long time that his wife is probably going to be the first female president of the United States. That lady has just got an aura about her. She's got a personality, and that's just almost contagious. So how's it going to feel to be the first Mr. or first man? Is that what you call him? The first man? The other's the first lady. Now I guess Austin's going to be the first man.
I'll take it if as long as she's the one that has to give the speeches and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
He doesn't like getting put on the spot or on camera, so I'm going to hear about this when we're done.
First man, Austin Razer.
I'll take it. She's awesome, and she's currently putting up with 2 young kids right now, and so she deserves a lot of credit, and I think she would be a great president.
I do too. She's just got a charisma about her.
Yeah, she's letting Austin just got done with trade show season. He went around and had the Coonless booth at a lot of trade shows. They got a new feed head design on the Coonless feeder, and then a newer like 500-pound capacity feeder coming out that he's been touring around. And he was home for one day and turned around and jumped in the truck with me and came down here to work on this property. So I'm very grateful for him, but very grateful for Ann, who hopefully she'll watch or listen to this and see that. So anyway, got to pick on him for a little bit, fill out a couple more minutes of time. Appreciate everybody watching. Brent Henderson is going to have Sunday night prayer time, and you can close us out, buddy.
God bless everyone. See you next week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Asio Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sunday Night Prayer Time. Always an honor to be with you all. I got to meet a lot of you guys up in Shipshewana 2 weeks ago at the Midwest Sportsman Classic. Best event I've ever done. I have done so many events, and Don and Terry both said, wait till you get to this event. It is awesome. And it was. I got to meet probably 2,000 or 3,000 people at this show. I got to speak twice. I got to hear so many of your stories. And the passion that everyone was coming up to the table with, between their love for the outdoors and their love for God, this event was hands down number one. And so thank you all for making it a great success. I had a lot of guys coming up and saying, man, I love it when you're on Sunday Night Prayer Time. I just love hearing stories and how you kind of take them from the wilds and bring them back to the home front. So that's what we're going to do again. I love doing that. That's kind of how I love teaching. So let's start tonight with going to Africa. This would have been around 2006. I was with my buddy Wade. And if you remember, when Wade would say to me, hey, I got an idea, run. He was always getting us in trouble. So this one night, we had been bow hunting all day long, and he said, hey, there is a ranger tower over there. It's about 30 feet tall. He said, we could hunt jackals and hyenas up there tonight. Let's go ahead and get all of our gear up there. I'm thinking this could be kind of fun. So I get the backpacks and the bows, and I'm going up this ladder one hand at a time. This 30-foot ladder, I'm climbing this thing. I get to the very top. I open this it's like a half door, like in a horse barn or something. And I open that half door, and everything comes unglued. I mean, on the count of one. It's these huge, giant owls. There's probably a half a dozen of them in there. And as the door swings open, I'm looking at these things. I'm kind of in awe. So I kind of just freeze for a second, and I'm watching them kind of fly around. Didn't realize that this one big one had come around. He comes behind me, smacks me on the back of my head with one of his wings, lands on the half door with these huge talons, leans right down in my face, starts hissing at me. I'm going down the ladder as fast as I can possibly go. So I get to the bottom, and Wade's kind of laughing at this whole thing. And I said, dude, I am not hunting up there tonight. So we go back to the compound, and I'm talking to the owner of the safari. And I said, hey, we got to the top, and there was a whole bunch of huge owls in there. I said, I'm not doing that. And he said, geez, I forgot about that. He goes, but really what I was more worried about was, he goes, I went in there a week ago to check on these owls. He said, I opened up the door, and there's a huge black mamba just kind of, they'll put 2/3 of their body up in a heartbeat. And I said, yeah, we're not doing that. He says, yeah, I hate mambas. He goes, man, I am so sorry. I forgot to tell you about that. So I was thinking about this because I shared a little bit of my black mamba story where my buddy and I caught a black mamba over there. Dumbest thing we've ever done. But I was thinking about that ranger tower as I was getting ready to make the lesson for this week. And I was remembering about a tree house that my dad had built when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. And when the springtime would come, you couldn't see. It was maybe 50 yards back up into the woods in Pennsylvania where I grew up. And when the leaves would come on, you couldn't see it, which was kind of fun. You kind of felt like you were connected to a lot bigger woods. So this one Saturday morning, after our rooms were clean, of course, we always had to have our rooms clean. My neighbor and I, my buddy, we got some lunches. Mom packed us like bologna sandwiches and chips. And we went up in the tree house and just doing what boys do up there. And probably blasting caps or doing something. And I hear a sound, and it's these two guys that are maybe a year or two older than we are coming through the woods, and they were the neighborhood bullies. And I'm like, oh no. Pretty soon they see us up there, they come up, and they're yelling at us, throwing stuff at us, sticks. And the one kid had a hatchet with him. And he said, you need to get down here right now. We're going to kick your butt. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And the kid says, you're not coming down. He said, I'm coming up. And as he's coming up the ladder with this hatchet, now we're freaking out. How do we get out here? It's too high to jump. I hear my dad's voice coming out the back door. I think he was taking the trash or something out. I swallowed all pride in that moment. My ego. I just started yelling, Dad, Dad. Dad heard the panic in my voice. He comes flying down the trail, up to the treehouse. These two boys see him coming. They take off running. My dad sees the hatchet, grabs the hatchet laying there, takes us both back to the house. We tell him the story, everything is fine. And I felt this was awesome because Dad showed up. He protected us. That's kind of like that roaring lion, with the roar within that I talk about from my book. He showed up. But that night when I went to bed, I can remember laying there thinking, what are those bullies going to say to everybody else now? Yeah, Daddy had to come bail you out. Because a boy's biggest question that gets answered by the father is in that moment when I'm called upon to come through. Can I, will I, do I have what it takes? And if the father doesn't have a good way of answering that question within the boy, he will search the rest of his life trying to figure out, do I have what it takes? Maybe through fighting, through drinking, through women, through working, through money, through titles, whatever. So it's really important that we understand that, guys, what a child almost always knows about God comes through their earthly father. We are a big part of answering that question, and if we don't, something begins to happen that we call the father wound. And that, I've said before, if we bury it, we carry it. And the other thing is, if we try to erase it from our memory, if we erase it, we'll chase it. If we try to bury the pain that I wasn't enough, I will keep chasing that the rest of my life. And this happened in my life as I got to be a little bit older. Maybe 3 or 4 years after that experience, I was sled riding just down the hill from the house. And these same bullies and 2 other guys that came with them saw the same kid and I sled riding. And they came over and started trying to pick a fight, and my buddy took off and ran home, left me there alone. Well, needless to say, the bullies shoved me around a lot, hit me. By the time I got home, I was really upset. My mom meets me at the top of the stairs. Honey, what's wrong? Because she could hear something was up. And I said, these same bullies were trying to beat me up again. And she goes, yeah. She goes, your dad had to send one of them to the office. He got in trouble. As a kid, you don't understand why somebody else is picking on you, taking it out on you. Well, my dad was a great teacher. He was also a disciplinarian. If you stepped out of line, you got the consequence. But also, if you were the kid that really studied hard, he was in your camp. He was helping you in every way he possibly could. So when my senior year came, maybe 3 years after this happened, my dad taught business in high school. I wanted to make my dad proud. So when I graduated, I had decided I didn't think I was going to go to college, but I took a store about 3 hours away that I had been working for during high school. A manager's position opened up. Dad taught business. I thought, what, this will make Dad proud. So I take the store 3 hours away. I've been there about 10 months. I'm missing my then girlfriend and my friends and my family. And this kid that was in high school with me, really, he was one of the popular kids, shows up. He's got a case of beer. He's got a stack of porn magazines, a box of stogies, and he goes, hey, we're going to have some fun. Well, this isn't the way that I was raised, right? I was pretty much raised in the church. I think I was born in a pew. We were there so much. But debauchery is the word, the weekend. We're popping tops and smoking stogies and flipping through the pages of this kind of stuff. And at my core, I knew this wasn't right, but I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be accepted. There you go. If you erase it, you'll chase it. I was trying to get approval of one of the cool kids. So this kid goes home on a Sunday night. The very next morning, Monday morning, I'm got to be at the store at 5 a.m. to unload the truck coming in. Probably not feeling the best after the weekend. About noon that day, the door opens up of the store, and here comes my mom and dad walking in. 3 hours from home, didn't tell me they were coming. My mom says, hey, we wanted to surprise you. I said, you did? Did you go to my apartment? She said, yeah, but it was locked. We couldn't get in. Why don't you give us the key and we'll go clean up? I said, you know what? It's a mess right now. And you didn't raise me that way. Give me 10 minutes. So I jump in my Firebird. I go flying down there, slide in sideways, come running up the outside steps to the house. And when I get up there, I get inside and I'm just trying to take all my debauchery. I'm throwing it in all these trash bags. I'm burning toast to try to cover the smell. Don't do that at home, kids. And so when they get to the top of the stairs, I've got everything now tied up and cinched up, and I'm taking it out. My dad goes, hey, when does your trash go? I said, well, my trash goes tomorrow morning. He goes, give me those. I'll go ahead and take them down and put them in the trash. I'm thinking, I got away with this. Next morning, I can smell my mom's Maxwell House coffee brewing, and she comes over. She's got some waffles. I sit down at the table, and I go, hey, where's Dad? She says, oh, he's outside. I guess some dog got into your trash last night, and it scattered all over the yard. I look outside, and there's my dad down there picking up all my stuff, right? I mean, he's just picking up Miss July, the beer cans, putting them in a bag, and I'm thinking, I know the shoe is about to drop. So I'm doing the walk of shame. I'm going down those stairs, and I get to the bottom, and my dad comes over to me, and I'm thinking, here we go. We didn't raise you like this. What's your mother going to say? And he sits down beside me, and rather than using shame and condemnation, what does he do? First thing he does, he looks at me, and he goes, are you okay? He cared about me because he knew me. He knew something wasn't right. I said, Dad, I'm really lonely. I'm really struggling. He says, yeah, I understand. He says, I want you to know something. He said, I really love you. I didn't know what to do with that. You know, the anger and the wounds that I had been carrying, what do you do with that? When your father comes up, he bails you out, and he tells you, I really love you. And then he said this, I know this has been really hard on you, and you don't have to prove yourself to me anymore. He says, it's okay to come home. Does God want us to go through brokenness? I asked that question at a men's retreat that I was doing this past weekend. The truth is, yes, he wants us to experience brokenness, but he doesn't want us to stay in brokenness. God wants us healed. Some of you are going, why is it that it seems like those flaming arrows that the enemy keeps shooting at me, keep hitting me in the same place? Does God not care? Well, the truth is, yeah, he does. Well, then why does he allow those arrows to keep hitting in the same spot? It's because he knows you need healing and he wants you to deal with the issue. Many of us have been tyrannized for a long time by maybe anger at our fathers, feeling like we're not good enough. There's a verse out of the Message paraphrase, and it's 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And it says, because Jesus has gone through everything you've gone through and more, learn to think like him. Learn to think of your sufferings as a weaning away from the old sinful habit of always expecting to get your own way. And then it says, then you won't be tyrannized anymore. Basically what it's saying is, by the things that you want. Now you can be plugged into what God wants into your life. So those things that we keep striving after to try to prove and chase in our life, they're tyrannizing us. God says, you don't have to do that anymore. What does he say? He says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I was leading a men's retreat this past weekend in southern Indiana. And at the very end of the event, I had a sword with me. It was a replica from a movie called Gladiator. And I had this sword, and I said, men, God's given each one of us a sword. And we can either use this to protect our families, we can use it to tear them down. What are you going to do with yours? These men who had come, many of them had come from addictions, rehab centers, porn addictions, drug addictions, alcohol. There were dentists, there were doctors, there was everything you can imagine that came to this thing, and every one of these guys are being tyrannized by the enemy. The unhealthy thoughts that the enemy hits us with, because we know that unhealthy thoughts create unhealthy emotions, which create unhealthy actions. So we have to go back and renew our minds. So the whole weekend, I was training these guys how to declaw the lies, of the enemy. In my new book, The Big Five Man Killers, which comes out in May, I know a lot of you pre-ordered it when I saw you a couple of weeks ago. That's what we're learning to do. It's a discipleship tool to help us to get rid of the lies that the enemy has been tyrannizing us with. And at the very end of the event, before the very last session, I said, guys, you've been working hard on this all weekend long, but I'm going to tell you something. Because you have chosen to pick up the sword that God has given you, the Word of God, Hebrews 4:12, and you were going to use this against the enemy, you need to know something. The enemy is going to come after you with everything he's got. Said, be watching for it. It could happen still at this retreat, on your way home, as soon as you get home, could be an argument with your wife. He's going to take this high that you're riding right now, and he's going to come after you. He wants to knock that sword out of your hands. He's like, you know what? I'll put down my guns, you put down yours. Well, let me say something. There is no compromise. That ain't happening. 5 minutes before the last event, all the power to the camp goes out. And I kind of looked around, the guys were like, what are we going to do? And I said, guys, this happens all the time. We're used to it. These are the spiritual attacks that the enemy puts against us, but you need to understand something. God wins. Do not be afraid. So we got a generator hooked up. About 45 minutes later, we had enough power to finish the event. We had the television screen where we have put the PowerPoint slides up there. I finished the last session. And at the very end of the last session, we had the guys all stand up and said, remember that sword that we talked about that God's given each one of you? And the men were instructed to actually take their hand and raise it like they had that sword in their hands above their head, and then said, I want you to put your foot on the ground and I want you to draw a line. That's the line you're going to tell the enemy, you cannot cross this anymore. You are not coming after my family, my children. And you tell the enemy, it's time, we're taking back ground. And now what I want you to do is I want you to step forward across that line. I'm thinking you might have a couple of guys that might step forward, every single man in that room with his sword drawn stepped forward like an army all at one in unison. It was one of the most powerful. I have goosebumps on my arms right now just remembering this. One of the most powerful moments we can ever experience is when men stand together and decide, no more, we are taking ground. The only way, guys, that we can do that is not from our own performance, right? It comes from knowing the Word of God and applying it to our lives. We are transformed by the renewing of our mind. Hebrews 4:12 talks about that sword that God has given us is the Word of God. It is living and active. It is sharper than any two-edged sword. It divides soul from spirit, right? The sword that God has given us divides truth from the lie. That's what these men were being taught how to fight back. You take the lie the enemy has hit you with, and you hold it up against the truth. How many of us have been holding these grudges against maybe our wives? We're feeling like they're not giving us the respect that we deserve. Well, if you're the guy that's demanding respect from your wife, let me ask you a question. How's that working for you? If you're the father who's using, guilt, shame, shunning, judging against your kids, how's that working for you? I don't know anyone who's truly been changed by guilting, shaming, shunning, or judging. When the Bible says that you go to them, then you go with the witness, then you take it before the church, and then it says you treat them like a pagan and tax collector, that doesn't mean shake the dust off your feet, have nothing to do with them. It means begin again with them because they didn't see their need for repentance. I think about how God has moved into our lives so many times when we didn't deserve it, and we know we didn't. And he says, son, I want you to know something. I don't keep any record of wrongs. I've cast your sin as far as the east is from the west. I remember them no more. It's time to come home. Maybe you've been carrying that wound a long time against your father, and it's time to find healing. It's time to be done with brokenness. Let's take that to God. Father God, I think about the man who came up to me at the event and just, without reservation, told me his story of being abused by his father at the age of 5. And now, as an adult male, he wants to heal that. That brokenness, that challenge that he faced became a gift in his life because he's not going to carry on the poison any longer, that his family, the generational things that have been happening for so long, he's breaking the cycle now. God, what it takes is men who are willing to step up and hold that sword up and saying, no more. I am taking ground back. I am breaking the cycle. Father, teach us to forgive. Teach us how to love well. Because when a man knows who he is in Christ, that he's been created in the image of the living God, when he is no longer held captive by the opinions of others or cares whether he lives or dies, that man is now extremely dangerous for good, because he's been unleashed. Father God, teach us how to be men who are unleashed, who are dangerous for good. Let us raise our swords. Let us step across that line and tell the enemy, no more. You have what it takes. We'll see you next time.